So why 434? The most probably a lot of you already know about this verse. Thank you so much. So I promised you, Muhammad, I'm not going to be asking you to go back and forth. We're going to spending pretty much the hour addressing this verse 434. It's known as the most problematic verse in the Quran, and for a reason. I'm here to argue, and this is published in my book, the outcome of this research, for a new understanding and new interpretation of 434, because it is problematic if we stick to the traditional mainstream understanding of 434. So far in this slide, I'm going to be using one of the best translations, but it's still problematic, and this is not my translation. Eventually, I'm going to replace this translation by a new translation based on my new interpretation. Something to point out, probably some of you are students of Arabic, some of you are native speakers of Arabic, some of you are new to Arabic. Many take it as granted when they read verses from the Quran in English that what they're reading is a translation of the Arabic. This is a problematic approach, because what you actually read is a translation of one interpretation of the actual Arabic. And therefore here, what I'm doing, as you can see here on the slide, what I try to do is to have both the Arabic and the English. And this is a method I adopt in my class, Women in the Quran. And here I highlighted the words, the equivalent words by using the same color. So even if you don't read Arabic, the idea is I'm trying to address the Arabic there. Because one of the big arguments you will find in this book, and in fact in my research methodology, is to go back to the language. Let the Quran speak. So when we feel there is something problematic about the Quran, probably it's our understanding or it's our interpretation. So the premise is, why not to give the verse, the Arabic of the Quran or the Quranic Arabic, a second chance to speak for itself, instead of allowing our own projections on the language of the Quran. The verse, I'm not going to read the verse, it's here for you to read. Sounds as if recommending 3 correction methods for men in cases of marital conflict. And those correction methods, so-called marital correction methods, ends with advising men to beat or to strike their wives. Of course, many try to respond to these so many challenges this verse suggests, because this verse, in its traditional, unfortunately still the mainstream understanding, doesn't stop to cause all kinds of embarrassments, not only to feminists, but for anyone who wants to argue for gender egalitarianism in the Quran. Even if you don't have that ideology, reading the rest of the Quran will suggest clear gender egalitarianism between men and women. So basically, the traditional understanding contradicts the rest of the Quran, and this is very puzzling, and it should be puzzling. Some tried, and I'm not gonna go here over all attempts to respond to it, because there are so many of these attempts. Generally speaking, some tried to soften the tone of the verse by suggesting prioritizing the 3 correction methods, and by suggesting that beating doesn't come until the end, and beating wives comes only, or is only recommended when everything else stops working, and it comes as a better remedy in order to avoid divorce, for example. here I'm gonna give you a quick advice. I always think of my students as my own kids, and please allow me to have this attitude here as well. Beating your wife to solve marital problems as a better remedy, I would say, it shouldn't work even as a better remedy. Because if your wife, your partner, marriage in the Quran is based on mawadda wa rahma, love and care, and they're both divinely provided. If your wife, if your spouse, if your husband doesn't understand you, doesn't respond to your needs from the way you look at them, better get out that marriage immediately. There is a divorce for a reason. So even arguing for beating wives as a solution to problem, I argue for it as a bigger problem. Because when you beat your wife, you're physically hurting her, but you're spiritually hurting your soul, spiritually hurting yourself. A man who beats anyone is not a man, let alone a man who beats his own wife. So this, with respect to all who suggested beating wives as a kind of a better solution, this is not a solution at all. It drags you into a bigger problem, religious, spiritual, and human problem. Some tried other methods. For example, some tried to argue for a very light beating. And they said it's beating with a feather or beating with miswak. Probably you don't know, I brought miswak here. You see, this is miswak. So it's the stick used to clean your teeth. So beating with a miswak. And this doesn't sound for me as a solution at all as well. And I see you're asking for a break. And probably, yeah, I'll end with this. Why is not a solution? Because remember, we're addressing a so-called problematic case of a marital conflict. Imagine I go to someone and I tell them, a counselor, an imam, a sheikh, someone, and I tell them I have problems with my wife, and they tell you, use this stick, use this miswak to solve your problems. Beating with a feather is tickling, is not beating. So doesn't these kinds of apologetic solutions, I would say, doesn't solve a problem, let alone they doesn't show any respect to our duty to reflect and to think and to rethink the Quran, which is a duty required in the Quran itself. Let me pause here. After we come back after the Salat, inshallah, I'm gonna go into 20 arguments for rejecting these arguments and to consider another and a new interpretation, inshallah.
Inshallah, perfect. Thank you so much. Folks, it is 6:22 right now. So
welcome back, everyone, and taqabbal Allah. I'm discussing 434, and for 20 reasons, providing a new interpretation of 434. But Muhammad, I wanted to respond to a very smart note was written in the chat, arguing or referring to one interpretation of "اضربوهن" as leave them, as a recommendation to leave women. So this I take also as a traditional attempt to respond to the controversy caused by the traditional interpretation of 434. But unfortunately, the response was by way not solving the problem or responding to the Arabic, but by way of masking the problem. Because arguing for other meanings for idribuhunna doesn't really speak to the precise way the verb is conjugated here in Arabic. All Arabic verbs are conjugated in a very precise way and this is one remarkable aspects of the beauty of Arabic. And for the also for the argument of the i'jaz of the Quran, inimitability of the Quranic language, where every word, every proposition, and even every letter stands for a specific meaning that can't be replaced by any other word or expression. Now, interpreting idribuhunna as leave them as a way to solve the problem, unfortunately, doesn't speak to any credible attempt to speak to the accuracy of the Quranic language, because the verse or the word idribuhunna, or to be more precise, the verb, doesn't come in the root shape or the masdar shape like daraba. Because the argument daraba, just like strike in English, can stand for meanings other than striking or physically hitting someone, can work, but not when we have like what we have in 434, the verb precisely conjugated. idribuhunna, the alif to precisely refer to a command made dribuhunna from the waw to a mixed group, men and women, or a group of men, dribuhunna, and due to the noon, to hit or strike a group of women, and here damir al-ghaib, or absent group of women. So the argument tried, and this is I truly agree, this is very popular now, that beating here doesn't stand for physical beating. Unfortunately, the precise Arabic here doesn't leave any room to doubt that it is physical beating. One of these linguistic maneuvers tried to say it's like daraba an or adraba an, which means to leave, but this will require a preposition. And we don't have that preposition, but this shouldn't be a big deal because the Prophet was illiterate anyway, so probably he missed that. Now, this route, I take it to solve a problem, although I appreciate it because it's trying to solve a problem, will open so many other problems. Because if we open the door to saying that some prepositions are omitted there, some expressions are not there, or maybe if we allow ourselves to project our more liberal needs on the text, instead of responding to the text, we will do the same mistake we keep criticizing patriarchy for doing. So if for 14 centuries, under the absence of any female exegetical voices, the text was processed by male needs, male desires, male interpretations, we don't want to flip the coin here and replace that by feminist interpretations, by liberal interpretations. We want to respond to what is in the text. Otherwise, we're going to be committing the same mistake, doing the same mistake we criticize others for doing. So daraba or idrubuhunna, because we don't have in the form of the root, because we have it fully conjugated, and because it's not followed by a preposition, it means striking or beating. It means that, and it refers to a group of women. So how can we then solve the controversy caused by this verse? And again, it's controversial, not because it doesn't speak to our liberal needs, our feminist needs, our more modern needs of the text, because it contradicts the rest of the Quran. And the Quran describes itself as a book, kitabun la rayba fih. It's a book with no contradiction. It's a book with no iwaj, right? So it's a sound book with no contradictions of any kind. So if I have one verse that contradicts the rest of the Quran, and the Quran describes itself as a book with no contradictions, that refers to one thing. There must be something wrong with the way we interpreted the verse. Now, with you, let me go over quickly the 20 reasons I argue for a new interpretation for 434. And to get, probably I'm getting ahead of myself, but to give you a little bit an idea about the new interpretation I'm switching to, I argue that the verse is not related at all to any marital context, or is not addressing at all conflicts in marriage. The verse is addressing the community of believers, both men and women, with the 3 correction methods to deal with women who violate the laws, the regulations. Okay, so keep this in mind. I hope in the rest of the time we have, I'm going to convince you by using my 20 arguments. So I'm using, sure. So I'm using this translation, which I don't agree to, but let me share with you, is the translation of Professor Abdul Halim. And this is the translation I use in my book as well. This is one of the best translations out there, but it's based on a specific interpretation of the verse. So let's start, and I'm moving with you in an order of words. So the first word says الرجال, and it's interpreted or even translated as husbands. The first mistake, الرجال in Arabic is men. It's not husbands. Husbands is azwaj. Okay. So the first argument, which should make us switch into it's not marital context. So الرجال is men. قوامون, and here it's translated as should take good care of their wives. قوامون refers to the financial duty to spend. And this is the equivalent of قوامون. This is another big story that we don't have time for it today. على النساء, and this is the second argument. النساء, again, the same mistake. Some of you are shaking your heads now, probably because you read Arabic and you're getting the mistakes. النساء is women, interpreted here and translated wrongly as wives. Again, it's men and women, what we have so far. We don't have husbands and wives. Let's move on. With the bounties God has given to some more than others, and here just minor thing, Professor Amina Wadoud, as she explains, فضل الله بعضهم على بعض. Some men are preferred to other men. It's masculine preferred to masculine. It's not فضل الله بعضهم على بعضهن, which means قوامة is not based on gender superiority. It's superiority among men themselves. Not all men are قوامون, because not all men can spend or willing to spend. Okay, this is not really related though to the new interpretation. Just wanted to mention it. فالصالحات, here interpreted and translated as righteous wives. Now in the Quran, and there is nothing like using the Quran to interpret the Quran. This method is called tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. Why? Because as I mentioned, there is always this concern that I might be projecting my needs on the text. So to make sure that I'm only responding to the text, I should seek the meaning of every term, every expression, and every letter from the Quran itself. So the term salihat, plural feminine, does it designate wives? No. In the Quran, salih, appropriate, good, can or fitting, can refer to good or righteous humans, and even to righteous jinn. In 7211, jinn or demons are speaking about themselves by saying some of us are righteous and others less so. So salih is righteous. It's not righteous wives. Again, so far, I don't have any marital context. And here, I'm just following the text. Qanitat, another question. Is qanita or devout, by using the adjective, the Arabic adjective qanita, specific or unique to wives? Again, no. Because going back to the Quran, there is a command given to Mary in 343, "Iqnuti, be devout to your Lord." And we know Mary, the mother of Jesus, is not known to be the wife of anyone according to the Quran. So far, the verse is not addressing marital context. Let's move on. فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ, and guard what God would have them guard, okay? And to preserve or to guard when unseen, because غيب literally means the unseen. And a big question here, unseen by who? The traditional patriarchal understanding of the verse will say that wives have the duty to guard what their husbands ask them to guard when they're unseen by their husbands. Again, what I see here in the verse is unseen. So they guard when they're unseen, and there's no specific mention to husbands at all. And why is it a big deal? It's a big deal because if women guard moral obligations only when seen by their husbands, and they stop doing that when they're unseen by their own husbands, this again will indicate moral and ethical superiority and gender-based superiority of men over women, which is not a Quranic argument at all. In the Quran, men and women are created from one soul and are equal. The verse then says, those women, and the verse starts describing those women. And of course, women from your community, right? We're not speaking about wives here. Those women, good women, salihat, qanitat, devout, righteous women. What is the definition of righteous women? Are women who guard what needs to be guarded when unseen. Now, the verse doesn't leave us to speculate too much by adding bima hafadh Allah. Allah is God, right? The Arabic for God. So I see here in the English translation, in their husband's absence, another mistake. It's when unseen by God, and they guard what God preserves or asks to be guarded. So it is the moral obligations that God himself asks both men and women to guard. Now the verse shifts into how to deal with women, right, who don't follow all of that. وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ, those who you fear their nushuz, right? High-handedness. What is nushuz? The later exegetical development of the word suggests that nushuz essentially and necessary is marital disobedience, right? Again, this is not a Quranic argument because nushuz is only a subcategory from disobedience that doesn't exhaust all kinds of being disobedient to God. Of course, being disobedient to your spouse, giving your spouse a hard time, is considered a kind of probably being disobedient to your own God, probably, but doesn't exhaust all of it. In other words, nushuz is not marital disobedience. To explain more, and this is my argument number 7 here, if we compare 434 with 4128, وإن امرأة خافت من بعلها نشوزا أو إعراضا, if a wife fears high-handedness or alienation from her husband. Now, what is the difference? The difference in 4:128, I have if a wife, I have husband. So the verse is literally referring and assuring us that this type of nushuz, this type of marital disobedience is specific to marriage. While here, I have just going against the norms. Another assurance that nushuz as a Quranic term is not really limited to marital disobedience is the another place where nushuz is mentioned, which is in 58:11. وَإِنْ قِيلَ لَكُمْ انشِزُوا فَانشِزُوا. O you who believe, and the verse will go, if you're told to rise up, rise up. So what is nushuz? Nushuz is a behavior that can be best understood as a behavior that goes against the norm. So everyone in the verse here in 58:11, everyone are taking seats down, and a group is asked to stand up. So they're doing something different. And violations of social, moral, legal, or even religious regulations are nothing but doing something against what everyone else are doing, or doing something against what you're expected to do. So the verse here then doesn't signal exactly a narrow case, a subcase, one case of nushuz, which is marital nushuz, but refers to any behavior that those women who violate laws do without showing any consideration to the rest of the community. And now we move from what is the meaning of nushuz into the three correction methods. The first one starts with عظوهن, which means reproach them, remind them of the teachings of God, something probably, if we're speaking in today's norms, give them a warning or repeated warnings, court warnings maybe, right? واهجروهن في المضاجع, step number 2. Now, again, this is very problematic. By the way, many people believe that اضربوهن, beat them, is problematic. اهجروهن في المضاجع is even, which stands for withholding sex. Withholding sex is no less problematic than this one. Now, why is it problematic? First of all, because, and here I'm on argument number 9, because husbands can't be recommended in the Quran to use sex or to use the intimate relationship or to use withholding sex as a way to correct the behavior of their wives. Why? Because this will contradict another prohibition made in 58:1-4 of what is known as al-dhihar, right? What is al-dhihar? Al-dhihar, which was prohibited in the Quran, refers to a pre-Islamic misogynist punishment in marriage, which probably exegetes were trying only to revive here. According to dhihar, a husband will threaten his wife by saying, "You're to me like the back of my mother," which means I'm not gonna be having intimacy with you anymore, which is a psychological abuse to women's right in marriage, no less harmful than the physical abuse that men involved in beating can do. Now, as I mentioned, at least from a Quranic perspective, there is no contradiction in the Quran. So if I have a verse that the metaphoric meaning of a verse contradicts the literal meaning of the other verse, probably it's more wise to go with the literal meaning of the other verse. So in 58:1-4, men are not allowed to even announce the intention to withhold sex. So how can that fit the recommendation here to do that, right? And the punishment is severe. If men only announce that by saying, "You're to me like the back of my mother," the Quran says you can't go back to her as a wife until you free a slave. Like worse punishments, worse violations in a Quranic plan to end slavery, the recommendation was go and free a slave. And if you don't have the money to free a slave, then you have to fast 2 months. We're approaching Ramadan. Probably those of you who observe Ramadan, you know how hard it's to fast 1 month, let alone 2 months, just for announcing the intention to withhold sex. So how can that fit a verse here, which sounds as if asking men to go with this punishment? Another reason, and this is reason number 10, why اهجروهن في المضاجع, ignore them in bed when you go to bed or withhold sex, can't fit the meaning here. It comes from the word madaja itself, madaja, okay? Madaja is interpreted in a metaphoric way to stand for beds. But going back to Arabic, madja is not bed. Madja is bedroom. And this is known in Arabic even to beginners in grammar. This is called isim makan, which means place noun. And it's driven from any root in a specific way. Let me give you an example you're more familiar with. Masjid, right? Masjid comes from the verb sajada, to prostrate. So it's a place where prostration takes place, right? Likewise, madja is a place where daja'a, where laying down, where sleeping takes place, which is bedroom. And why leave them in the bedrooms? And this is punishment number 2. When warning, reproaching, repeated reproaching won't help, probably the verse moves into you lock those violators in their bedrooms. The 14 centuries ago, the norm was for prisoners, both men and women, to be locked. They didn't have prisons back then, to be locked in their own houses or their own bedrooms. Many times the house is just one bedroom, right? And because it preserves the dignity of women, probably to be locked in their own bedrooms. Before I leave it as well, I'm going to refer to argument number 11, why withholding sex is not a Quranic argument. I teach sexuality in addition to teaching women in the Quran. And it doesn't speak even to the basics about human sexuality. I mean, seriously, men can punish women by withholding sex. It seems to me better if it's the other way. I mean, women can probably punish husbands by withholding sex. It's because we all know, of course, there are exceptions to every case, that usually basics about human sexuality, that men are more sexually demanding, women are more emotionally demanding. So the verse, if interpreted as recommending withholding sex to solve problems in marriage, is not addressing basics about human sexuality. Number 12, the addressee, the real addressee here in the verse. And to be honest with you guys, this is what led me to the whole new interpretation. Who is addressed here in the verse? I don't have husbands, right? We already rolled out the possibility that it's husbands and wives. If we just go back to the previous verse, to 429, it's, oh, you who believe, ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, which means the whole issue is not addressed to husbands, is not addressed to angry husbands, it's addressed to the community of believers. This is assured not only in the previous verse. If we also go to the verse that comes after 434, if we go to 435, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ شِقَاقَ بَيْنِهِمَا, and if you fear a conflict between both of them, a husband and a wife or community, then do this and that. And the question is, if the previous verse is addressing the community of believers, and the verse that comes after it is also addressing the community of believers, and I don't have in the verse any switch in addressee to say that it's addressing husbands and wives. Why to do this switch between the previous verse, the verse that comes after it, or the verse itself, right? So it's addressing the community of believers with what to do with women who violate laws. Back to the verse as well, idribuhunna now, beat them or strike them. A question, can the Quran ask for beating as a legal punishment? The question is yes. And why? Because it's found in the Quran, in other places. For example, the punishment for publicly witnessed fornication, zina, prostitution, or pornography today, publicly witnessed with four witnesses observing what's going on from four different angles, right, is 100 lashes, 100 lashes. I'm mentioning this to show that, yes, in the Quran, beating was considered as a way to punish people who publicly violate the rest of the community. Now, do we have to go with that? A big question to be asked here. Maybe yes and maybe no. Why? Because here, like in the rest of the Quran, when the Quran switches from providing personal moral guidance into legal guidance, the Quran switches to a very loose language. وَإِذَا حَكَمْتُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ أَن تَحْكُمُوا بِالْعَدْلِ. If you rule among people, seek justice. What is justice? Justice 14 centuries ago is different from justice now. It's open to courts, congregations, judges, lawyers. It's open to you. The Quran is not there to replace the human responsibility to be a Khalifa, to be a deputy on earth. So if a court rules out beating as a punishment, that's totally fine. That's totally Quranic. I dream also of a time when we won't need presence as well. When warning will be enough, just warning. If we spend more money on education, if the money we spend on opening presence, we spend on opening the schools, probably as humans, we reach a point where we won't need even to have presence, let alone to punish by beating. So with everything legal in the Quran, as I mentioned, it's up to human beings, to courts, to congregations, right? Also, another reason why this new interpretation is more plausible, because it matches the rest of the Quran when it comes to dealing with women as a delicate subcategory that needs to be protected in the community. In the Quran, women, elderly, the elderly, al-fuqara, the poor, al-masakin, orphans are treated with delicate attention, because in human societies, there is this natural tendency for the strong to take advantage of the weak. And probably this verse is addressing the need to protect women, even when it comes to how we deal with women who violate laws. Also, I want to mention that in the verse itself, and here I have number 17, there is a consistency in keeping the same addressee. And here I'd like to stop with the conjunction fa in فَالصَّالِحَاتِ. So I started with women. And فَالصَّالِحَاتِ, and fa is a conjunction, so righteous women. So I just wanted to mention the conjunction here, that I didn't really have any switch in the addressee. I have a consistency in what I'm addressing in the verse. Another reason why this verse can't refer to any marital case is also, and this is something mentioned in one of your notes in the chat, the prophetic behavior itself. In my research methodology, I use the Quran to interpret the Quran, but probably for those who want to add something from the Sirah, the life story of the Prophet himself, never ever anyone reported or mentioned that the Prophet, who had more than one wife, used any of the three methods, especially withholding sex and beating women, as a way to correct the behavior of his wives, right? And the Prophet is considered a role model for Muslims, which means if he's recommended to do something in the Quran, at least he will have to follow it to behave as a role model to everyone else. So why to leave the 3 recommendations, even with all the fabrications about the Prophet? Because we know in the science of Hadith, even the scholars of Hadith themselves, they have categories under this is mawdu', this is totally fabricated, right? This is da'if, this is weak hadith, and this is sahih, this is sound hadith. Even with all the fabrications made against the Prophet, we don't have even one fabrication saying that he used to hit his wives, right? So this, logically speaking, should lead us to suspect that the way we understood 434 is a sound way. Number 19, in its mainstream understanding, the verse contradicts another verse in the Quran, which is 419, عاشرهن بالمعروف. And this is what I call the golden rule to treat women. Deal with them, live with them according to ma'ruf. And ma'ruf comes from the root arifa, to know. So what is known as good, what is the standard, right? Again, it's a very general language, because what is ma'ruf, what is considered a good treatment for one community won't be considered as a good treatment in other times, maybe in other times, other communities. But ma'ruf also, do me ma'ruf, do me a favor, do me a favor. So it's the best way any human being can deal with his partner, right? So I don't think that withholding sex and beating women is considered as ma'ruf or as seeking the best standards of any community. The last concern is the verse in its new understanding matches more the clear gender egalitarian message we see in the rest of the Quran. And let me end by saying that, as I include in my book, I end all my concerns with a new translation based on a new interpretation of the verse. Thank you for listening. I had some very good comments in the chat. If we have time, Muhammad, maybe we take more questions or comments, whatever the time allows for. And thank you for listening to my long argument.
Well, thank you so much. That was excellent. Like you said in the very beginning, it's really hard for a lot of Muslims who are uninformed to make a valid judgment and argument against people who come at Islam using this exact verse. So hearing your input is extremely helpful. Malik, it looks like you have a question. So if you would like to ask it, go for it.
Yeah. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Malik. Thank you so much for coming to talking to us. I think this is an amazing talk. I had a question about the word fasalihat. I know salihat, like I know you talked about it, but from my understanding, anywhere salihat is mentioned in the Quran, it's in a form of a marital relationship, as-salihun al-salihat and whatnot. And I cannot recall any other time. But obviously, I'm not sure. So, like, could you please touch a bit on that? And yeah.
Wa alaikum salam, Malik. Thank you so much for your question. So, as I mentioned, as-salihat or salih is mentioned in the Quran. In one verse, I quoted the verse, forgive me, I don't have it memorized. Yeah, it's in 72:11. It's the jinn speaking about themselves and saying, among us there are salihun, and among us are different, and jinn, which refers to demons or bad jinn, which means the adjective itself is a subcategory. So a zawja salihah, the righteous wife, is just a subcategory of any human being, salih human being. So salih is not restricted to marital context. Similar like nushuz is not restricted to marital context. It's known as this, right? Because the exegetical development of those terms narrowed them down to one way. At least we use them in one way, but in the Quran we have more than that. So definitely as-salihat here is righteous women, and it's not limited to righteous wives. Thank you for your question, Malik.
Thank you. Shukran.
Does anybody else have any questions that they would like to ask Professor Hasan? Or if you'd like to, yeah, Samir, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Samir, by the way. Thank you so much for your discussion. That was absolutely amazing. One question I had was last week we had people from Anara come and they kind of gave us a little discussion. And I was kind of asking, what exactly is the proper way to handle a situation where perhaps we see people in our community actually doing these kind of, domestic violence things, either with their wives or, things of that nature. And I wanted to know perhaps if you can give us some kind of advice or, just a way to how to handle that, and whether it's appropriate for us. Obviously, we're not really scholars, and obviously we're just college students, whether we have a right to do anything, and what exactly is the proper method for us to actually go out and implement that.
Thank you so much, Samir, for your question. Definitely, if the conflict in any marital relationship escalates to those dangerous levels, definitely you need a kind of professional counseling, right? So first of all, if we start from acknowledging that beating is not a Quranic thing, at least don't say that it's something recommended in a divine text, because it's a big flat lie. Second comes, what should we do then? You go to counseling, and it's very interesting that we take counseling as a modern thing, but counseling is mentioned in the Quran. So in the Quran, there is a recommendation that a woman, if she fears, وَإِنْ امْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ مِنْ بَعْلِهَا نُشُوزًا أَوْ إِعْرَاضًا, if a woman fears alienation or high-handedness from her husband, they should start a dialogue between them. Now, the Quran moves into وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ شِقَاقَ بَيْنِهِمَا فَابْعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهَا. Forgive me if I'm not quoting the exact words here. So the Quran goes into addressing the community of believers with the message that when things escalates beyond what a conversation, an honest conversation between a husband and a wife can solve, that maybe someone from his side, from his family's side, someone from her family's side should meet to discuss the problem. So the community, and this translates into today's counseling. So there are so many things to be done, and for sure, violence is not one of them. At least I would say it's not Quranic. Probably it's seen in some societies, in some communities, but we should start by disconnecting that from seeing it as something religious to be done. It's not something in the Quran. To the opposite, it contradicts the rest of the Quran.